Montana Territory, 1877. The blizzard hit the high country like a vengeful spirit, and Reed Nolan knew he should have turned back hours ago, but turning back was never something he did well. At 25, he had already outlived most men who chose his profession. Hired gun, drifter, the kind of man towns welcomed when trouble came calling and quietly asked to leave once the smoke cleared. He had learned early that attachment was a luxury men like him could not afford. Love was for settlers and shopkeepers, not for someone with 13 notches carved into his conscience and a price on his head in 3 territories. The wind screamed through the mountain pass, and Reed pulled his hat lower, squinting through the white curtain that had swallowed the world. His horse stumbled, exhausted, and that was when he saw it, a dark shape against the snow, too angular to be natural. A wagon overturned, one wheel still spinning lazily in the wind. Reed urged his horse forward, every instinct telling him to ride on. Getting involved meant complications. Complications meant staying in one place too long. Staying too long meant getting caught or worse, getting attached. But even a man who had given up on redemption could not ride past a wagon in a blizzard. He dismounted, his boots sinking deep into the powder, and approached cautiously. The wagon had gone over on its side, supplies scattered across the snow like a child's abandoned toys. Then he heard it, a soft sound, almost lost in the wind, a voice trembling but defiant. "Stay back. I have a gun." Reed raised his hands slowly, keeping them visible. "I am not here to hurt you, ma'am, but you will not last the night out here." A figure emerged from behind the wagon, and Reed felt something shift in his chest, something he had thought long dead. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with honey blonde hair plastered to her face by snow and fear. Her brown dress was torn at the shoulder, and she held an old percussion pistol in shaking hands. Even through the storm, he could see she was beautiful, but it was her eyes that struck him, green as spring grass, filled with terror and something else. "Determination. My father," she said, her voice breaking. "He is trapped under the wagon, please." Reed moved quickly then, dropping to his knees beside the overturned wagon. An older man lay pinned beneath it, unconscious, his leg twisted at a wrong angle. The wagon was too heavy for one man to lift, especially in snow this deep. "What is your name?" Reed asked, already assessing the situation. "Margaret." "Margaret Walsh, please, can you help him?" "I will do what I can, Miss Walsh, but I need you to put that pistol down and help me. We need to dig out some of this snow and find leverage." For a moment she hesitated, and Reed understood. She had no reason to trust him. Out here, a woman alone with a stranger was one bad decision away from disaster. But the wind howled louder, and her father groaned beneath the wagon, and sometimes trust was not about faith but about having no other choice. She lowered the gun. They worked in desperate silence, digging with their hands, using a broken wagon plank as a lever. Reed's muscles screamed as he strained against the weight, and just when he thought it was impossible, Margaret added her strength to his, and together they lifted the wagon enough for Reed to drag her father clear. "There is a line shack about 2 miles north," Reed said, already lifting the unconscious man. "Can you ride?" "Yes, but the horse is gone. It bolted when we overturned." "Then you ride with me. Come on before this storm buries us all." Reed hauled the injured man across his saddle, then swung up behind him, reaching down for Margaret. She hesitated again, looking at her father's supplies scattered in the snow. "Leave it," Reed said. "None of it matters if you are dead." She took his hand and he pulled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, and Reed told himself the warmth he felt was just relief at finding another living soul in the storm. Nothing more, could not be more. His life had no room for more. The ride to the line shack was a nightmare of white blindness and biting cold. Reed navigated by instinct and luck, and when the small cabin finally materialized out of the storm, he offered a silent prayer to whatever god still listened to men like him. Inside, the shack was crude but solid, one room with a stone fireplace, a bunk, and a few supplies left by whatever rancher used it during roundup. Reed laid Margaret's father on the bunk while she started a fire with shaking hands. "Is he going to die?" she asked, her voice small. Reed examined the man's leg, broken badly, but the bone had not pierced the skin. Not if I can help it, but I need to set this leg and it is going to hurt him. You might want to step outside. I am not leaving him. Reed looked at her then, really looked at her. Margaret Walsh had lost her hat somewhere in the chaos, and her blonde hair fell in wet tangles around her face. She was shivering, her dress soaked through, but her jaw was set with the kind of stubborn courage Reed had seen in soldiers and not much anywhere else. All right then, hold him down, this is going to be bad. It was. Her father woke screaming as Reed set the bone, and Margaret held him with strength Reed had not expected, whispering reassurances even as tears streamed down her face. When it was done, Reed splinted the leg with broken pieces of firewood and strips torn from a blanket. You did good, he told Margaret, and she nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you, I do not even know your name. Reed. Reed Nolan. She moved to the fire, holding her hands out to the flames. We were heading to Silver Creek. My father bought a store there, sight unseen. We were going to start over after. She trailed off. After what? After my mother died, 6 months ago, cancer. My father thought a new place might help us forget. Reed said nothing. He knew about trying to outrun grief. He had been doing it for 8 years, ever since the war ended and he came home to find his family's farm burned and his younger sister dead. Some things could not be forgotten, only buried deeper. You cannot make it to Silver Creek, not with him like this, Reed said. And that storm is going to last through tomorrow at least. We are stuck here. Margaret turned to face him, and in the firelight she looked younger, more vulnerable. Will you stay, please? I know you probably have somewhere to be, but I cannot manage him alone, and She stopped, pride and fear warring on her face. Reed thought about the job waiting for him in Bannack, the man he was supposed to meet, the money he needed. He thought about his rule, never stay, never get involved, never let anyone matter. But he looked at Margaret Walsh with her green eyes and her stubborn courage, and he heard himself say, I will stay until your father can travel. The relief on her face made something in his chest hurt. That night Reed gave Margaret the bunk with her father and made himself a bedroll on the floor. He lay awake listening to the storm rage outside and Margaret's soft breathing inside, and he told himself this was just a delay. A few days, maybe a week, and then he would move on. He always moved on. But as sleep finally claimed him, he could not shake the feeling that the storm had brought him here for a reason, and that reason had green eyes and made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was tired of running. Morning came gray and cold, the storm still howling outside. Margaret woke first, and Reed watched through half-closed eyes as she checked on her father, adjusting his blanket with gentle hands. She had taken off her wet dress and wrapped herself in a spare blanket from the shack's supplies, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She looked so young, so out of place in this harsh land, and Reed felt an unfamiliar surge of protectiveness. How is he? Reed asked, sitting up. Margaret startled slightly, then smiled, and Reed realized it was the first time he had seen her smile. It transformed her face, made her impossibly more beautiful. Sleeping. The fever has not set in yet. That is good, right? That is very good, means the bone is set clean. Reed stood, moving to the small stove. There is coffee here and some hardtack. Not much, but it will keep us going. They shared a simple breakfast, and Reed found himself watching the way Margaret moved, economical and graceful even in these rough circumstances. She caught him looking and blushed, turning away. Tell me about Silver Creek, Reed said, more to fill the silence than from real curiosity. Margaret's face brightened. It is supposed to be a real town with a school and a church. My father says the store he bought is right on Main Street. We are going to sell dry goods and maybe have a lending library. I have always wanted to run a lending library. She paused, her smile fading. At least that was the plan. Now I do not know. If his leg does not heal right, he will not be able to manage the store. One problem at a time, Miss Walsh. Margaret, please call me Margaret. Miss Walsh makes me feel like a schoolmarm. Reed allowed himself a small smile. Margaret then. They fell into an easy rhythm over the next 2 days. The storm continued, trapping them in the small cabin, but it felt less like imprisonment and more like sanctuary. Reed hunted through the shack's supplies and found flour and salt, enough to make decent biscuits. Margaret proved surprisingly skilled at making the most of nothing, turning their meager provisions into something almost like real meals. Her father, whose name was Thomas, drifted in and out of consciousness, but the fever Margaret feared never materialized. Reed changed the bandages twice a day, and Margaret assisted with steady hands, learning quickly how to care for the injury. During the long hours of forced inactivity, they talked. Reed found himself sharing things he had never told anyone, not about his past, that was still too dangerous, but about small things, his love of early mornings. His father teaching him to track, the way the plains looked when thunderstorms rolled across them. Margaret shared too, her mother's love of poetry, her own dreams of traveling east to see the ocean. The fear that had gripped her when her mother died, the terror of being alone in the world with only her aging father. "That is why you are so brave," Reed said on the third night, as they sat by the fire while Thomas slept. "You have already survived the worst thing you could imagine." Margaret looked at him, her green eyes reflecting the flames. "I am not brave, I am terrified most of the time." "I am terrified right now." "Of what?" "Of what happens when the storm ends, of being alone again, of watching another person I love." She stopped, shaking her head. "I should not burden you with this." Reed reached out, surprising himself, and took her hand. It was small and cold in his, and she did not pull away. "You are not alone right now. But you will leave. When my father is well enough, you will go wherever men like you go, and I will go to Silver Creek, and we will never see each other again." She was right, of course. That was how it had to be. Reed had nothing to offer a woman like Margaret. He was a hired gun with a violent past and probably a violent future. She deserved a shopkeeper or a banker, someone who could give her stability and safety, and a life that did not involve looking over her shoulder. But sitting there with her hand in his, the firelight painting her face in gold, Reed felt the foundations of his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. "Maybe," he said finally, and even he did not know what that meant. The storm broke on the fourth day, and with it came a reckoning Reed had been dreading. They could not stay in the line shack forever, and Thomas Walsh needed real medical attention. The nearest town with a doctor was Silver Creek, still 20 miles north. "I will take you there," Reed said, already saddling his horse. "We will go slow, make camp at night. Your father can ride and you can walk, or we can trade off." "You do not have to do this," Margaret said, but her relief was obvious. "You have already done so much. I said I would see you safely through this. I am a man of my word." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. Reed had broken plenty of promises in his life. But the idea of leaving Margaret alone with her injured father, vulnerable to every danger the territory could throw at them, made his chest tight with something that felt dangerously like caring. They set out under a clear sky, the world transformed into a blinding white landscape. Reed walked ahead, leading his horse with Thomas propped in the saddle, while Margaret followed behind. Progress was slow and exhausting, and they covered maybe 5 miles before Reed called a halt. That night, camped under the stars, Thomas Walsh regained enough consciousness to speak. Reed was checking the splint when the older man's eyes opened, focusing on him with surprising clarity. "You are the man who saved us," Thomas said, his voice rough. "I helped, sir. Your daughter did most of the work." Thomas turned his head, finding Margaret where she sat by the fire. "She is stronger than she knows, takes after her mother that way." He looked back at Reed. "You have a good face, honest. But there is pain in your eyes. I have seen that look before, on men who came back from the war." Reed stiffened. "I do not talk about the war. Most men who lived through it do not." Thomas tried to sit up, winced, and lay back. "I am not asking you to. I am just saying I recognize the look. And I am saying thank you for not being the kind of man who would take advantage of two people in need." Reed nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "She is my whole world, you know," Thomas continued, his voice dropping. "Since her mother passed, Margaret is all I have left. I need to get her somewhere safe, somewhere she can build a life. That is why we are going to Silver Creek. Fresh start, respectable business. a chance for her to meet a good man and have a family. The words hit Reed like a physical blow. Of course, that was what Margaret needed, what she deserved. Not a drifter with blood on his hands and no prospects beyond the next job. She will be fine, sir. Silver Creek is a good town. Will you stay after you get us there? Thomas asked, and Reed heard the real question underneath. Are you interested in my daughter? No, sir, I have business elsewhere. Thomas studied him for a long moment, and Reed had the uncomfortable feeling the older man saw too much. Pity, I think Margaret has taken a liking to you. And unless I am much mistaken, you feel something for her too. What I feel does not matter. I am not the kind of man who settles down. Because you do not want to, or because you think you cannot. Reed stood abruptly. I will take first watch, you should rest. He walked away before Thomas could respond, but the old man's words followed him into the darkness. Because you think you cannot, was that it? Had Reed spent so many years believing he was unworthy of a normal life, that he had made it a self-fulfilling prophecy? He looked back at the campfire where Margaret was tending to her father, her profile silhouetted against the flames, and felt his carefully maintained walls crack a little more. They reached Silver Creek 2 days later, and Reed's first impression was that it was exactly the kind of town Margaret belonged in. Clean streets, a white church steeple, children playing in front of a schoolhouse. Civilization, or at least the frontier's best attempt at it. The town doctor, an older man named Carver, examined Thomas's leg and pronounced Reed's field medicine competent. He will walk again, though he might have a limp. Keep off it for 6 weeks, use crutches after that, and he should recover fully. Margaret nearly collapsed with relief, and Reed caught her elbow, steadying her. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Thank you for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you. No payment needed, I am just glad you are safe. The store Thomas had purchased turned out to be in good condition, with living quarters above it. Reed helped them settle in, carrying Thomas upstairs and arranging furniture while Margaret swept and cleaned. It felt domestic and strange, and Reed could almost imagine what it would be like to have this. A home, a purpose, someone to come back to at the end of the day. But that night as he prepared to leave, Margaret stopped him at the door. Where will you go? She asked. Bannock, I have work there. What kind of work? Reed hesitated. He could lie, but she deserved better than that. The kind of work men hire me for. Trouble with claim jumpers or rustlers or men who need convincing to leave town. Margaret's face fell. You are a gunfighter. I am what the frontier made me, Margaret. No, she said, her voice fierce. You are what you choose to be. And the man who saved my father and me, who was gentle and kind and patient, that is who you really are. You do not know me. You do not know the things I have done. Then tell me. Reed shook his head. I cannot, but I can tell you this. You deserve better than a man like me. Your father wants you to have a good life, a safe life. That is not something I can give you. Margaret stepped closer, and Reed could smell the soap she had used, something clean and fresh. What if I do not want safe? What if I want you? For one dizzying moment, Reed let himself imagine it. Staying in Silver Creek, helping run the store, building a life with Margaret. Waking up next to her every morning, seeing her smile, having a home. Then reality crashed back. The men he had killed, the price on his head, the enemies who would eventually come looking. He would bring danger to her doorstep, put her at risk. Loving him would destroy her. I cannot, he said, and walked out into the night before he could change his mind. Reed made it halfway to Bannock before he turned around. He told himself he just wanted to make sure Margaret and her father were settled, that he would check in once and then leave for good. But the truth was, 3 days away from Silver Creek had been 3 days of misery, and Reed was tired of lying to himself. The problem was, when he rode back into town 5 days after he had left, things had changed, and not for the better. He found Margaret in the store, arranging bolts of fabric, and the smile that lit her face when she saw him made his heart stutter. But there was something else too, worry. Reed, I did not think I would see you again. I wanted to make sure you were managing all right. How is your father? Better, the doctor says he is healing well. But Reed, there is something you should know. There is a man, his name is Cyrus Tate. He showed up 2 days ago, claiming my father bought the store from him under false pretenses. He says we owe him $5,000 or he will take the store back. Reed's jaw tightened. What does your father say? That Tate sold the store fair and square, but the original deed was apparently in someone else's name, someone who may have had a prior claim. It is all very confusing, and the territorial judge will not be through until next month. Tate says if we do not pay by then, he will have the law on his side. Where is this Tate now? He has been staying at the saloon, drinking and making threats. Reed, I am frightened. He looks at me in a way that makes my skin crawl. The protective rage that surged through Reed was so strong it nearly knocked him back a step. He had tried to leave, tried to do the right thing, but fate or providence or sheer stubbornness had brought him back. And now Margaret needed him. I will handle Tate, Reed said. Please, do not do anything that will get you in trouble. I could not bear it if you were hurt because of us. Reed took her hand, the touch sending warmth up his arm. I will not let anything happen to you, I promise. It was a dangerous promise, the kind he had sworn never to make. But looking into Margaret's green eyes, Reed knew he was already too far gone to turn back. He found Cyrus Tate in the Gold Strike Saloon, a beefy man with a mean face and cheap whiskey on his breath. Tate was holding court at a corner table, surrounded by a couple of hard-looking men who had hired muscle written all over them. Reed approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. Every man in the saloon tracked his movement, sensing trouble. Cyrus Tate? Reed asked. The big man looked up, his eyes narrowing. Who is asking? Someone who is interested in your claim on the Walsh property. Tate laughed, a harsh sound. You her new protector, boy. Pretty little thing like that needs a man around, I will give you that. But this is business, and unless you got $5,000 burning a hole in your pocket, I suggest you move along. Reed pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. I think we both know your claim is worth about as much as Confederate script. You sold that store legally, and now you are trying to squeeze money out of a sick man and his daughter. Tate's smile disappeared. You calling me a cheat? I am calling you what you are. The question is, what are you going to do about it? One of Tate's men started to rise, his hand moving toward his gun, but Tate stopped him with a gesture. You know who I am, son. I have friends in this territory. I can make life very difficult for people who cross me. And I have a reputation for making people like you disappear, Reed said quietly. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to forget about the Walsh store. You are going to ride out of Silver Creek tonight and not come back. And if anything happens to Margaret or her father, anything at all, I will find you. Do we understand each other? For a long moment, the saloon was silent except for the clink of glasses and the tick of the old clock behind the bar. Tate studied Reed with the calculating look of a man weighing his odds. You talk big for a saddled tramp, Tate said finally, but talk is cheap. You willing to back it up? Reed stood slowly, his hand resting casually near his gun. Try me. Tate stared at him, and whatever he saw in Reed's eyes made him look away first. This is not over. Yeah, it is. Reed walked out of the saloon, knowing Tate's eyes were burning holes in his back. He had made an enemy today, maybe a dangerous one. But Margaret was safe, at least for now, and that was all that mattered. When he returned to the store, he found Margaret upstairs with her father. Thomas was sitting up in bed, and he looked better, stronger. What did you do? Margaret asked, wringing her hands. I had a conversation with Mr. Tate. I do not think he will bother you any more. Thomas studied Reed for a long moment. Son, sit down. We need to talk. Reed sat, feeling like a schoolboy called before the headmaster. My daughter tells me you came back, Thomas said. Why? I wanted to make sure you were both all right. That is not all of it, and we both know it. Thomas glanced at Margaret. Honey, could you give us a moment? Margaret looked between them, then nodded and left the room, though Reed suspected she was listening from just outside the door. You are in love with her, Thomas said once they were alone. Reed started to deny it, then stopped. What was the point? Yes, sir, I am. And she is in love with you. I can see it every time she says your name. That is why I left the first time. She deserves better than me. Maybe, Thomas said. But here is what I have learned in 60 years on this earth. We do not always get what we deserve. Sometimes we get what we need, and I think maybe you two need each other. Sir, you do not know my past. The things I have done. Thomas held up a hand. I do not need to know. I can see what kind of man you are now. You could have ridden past our wagon in that storm. You could have robbed us or worse. Instead, you saved our lives and asked for nothing in return. That tells me more about your character than whatever you did before. But I am a hired gun. I have killed men. So have a lot of men who are now preachers and shopkeepers and fathers. The war saw to that. The question is not who you were, it is who you want to be. Reed felt something break inside him, some dam he had built to hold back hope. I want to be someone she can be proud of. But I do not know how. Thomas smiled. Then let me tell you something my father told me when I was courting Margaret's mother. Being a good man is not about being perfect. It is about showing up every day and trying to do better than you did the day before. Can you do that? Reed thought about the years he had spent running, the loneliness, the empty nights in empty towns. And he thought about Margaret's smile, the way she had held his hand by the fire, the feeling of almost being home. Yes, sir, I can try. Then that is good enough for me. Now go talk to my daughter before she wears a hole in the floorboards out there. Reed found Margaret in the hallway, and one look at her face told him she had heard everything. Did you mean it? She asked. About being in love with me. Reed had faced down gunfighters and outlaws, had charged into battle and stared death in the face more times than he could count. But nothing had ever terrified him as much as the next words out of his mouth. Yes, I love you, Margaret Walsh. I think I have loved you since you pointed that pistol at me in the snow. And I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I want to try. I want to be the kind of man who deserves you. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. You already are that man, Reed. You just do not see it yet. She stepped forward and kissed him, soft and sweet, and Reed felt the last of his walls crumble. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and for the first time in 8 years he felt something other than empty. When they finally broke apart, Margaret rested her head against his chest, and Reed could feel her heartbeat against his. What happens now? She whispered. Now I need to settle some things, make sure my past does not follow me here, but then if you will have me, I would like to stay, help you and your father run the store, build a life here. With you? Margaret looked up at him, her green eyes shining. I will have you, Reed Nolan, today, tomorrow, and every day after that. It should have been that simple. It should have been the happy ending they both wanted. But the frontier had a way of making people pay for happiness, and Reed's debt was about to come due. The trouble arrived 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning when Reed was helping unload a supply wagon. 3 riders came into town, and Reed knew from the way they carried themselves that they were not cowboys or drifters. These were manhunters. The lead rider was a tall man with a marshal's badge and cold eyes. He reined in directly in front of the store, and Reed felt ice form in his stomach. You Reed Nolan? The marshal asked. Depends on who is asking. Marshal Jack Cordell, Territorial Law. I have a warrant for your arrest, Nolan. Murder committed in Wyoming Territory in 1873. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face pale. There must be some mistake. No mistake, ma'am. This man is wanted for killing a rancher named Samuel Pritchard. He is coming with me. Reed's mind raced. Pritchard. He remembered that name, remembered the job that had gone wrong, the corrupt rancher who had been squeezing homesteaders and had hired Reed to intimidate them. When Reed discovered Pritchard was planning to burn them out with families still inside, he had confronted the rancher. The fight that followed had ended with Pritchard dead and Reed on the run. I have witnesses, Nolan, Cordell said. You were seen leaving Pritchard's ranch the night he died. You going to come quiet, or do we need to make this hard? Reed looked at Margaret, saw the fear and confusion in her eyes, and made a decision. He would not risk a shootout in the middle of town, not with her so close. I will come, just give me a moment to say goodbye. Cordell nodded and Reed walked to Margaret, taking her hands. I am so sorry, he said quietly. I should have told you everything from the beginning. Did you do it? Did you kill that man? Reed could lie, make himself look better, but he had promised her the truth. Yes, but he was going to murder families, Margaret. I could not let that happen. She searched his face, and Reed braced himself for her to pull away, to look at him with disgust or fear. Instead, she gripped his hands tighter. Then we will fight this. There are lawyers, judges. You were protecting people. That has to mean something. Margaret, I am a hired gun. The law does not care why I did it. I will hang. No, her voice was fierce, desperate. I will not let that happen. We will find a way. But even as she said it, Reed knew the truth. His past had finally caught up with him, and this time there was no outrunning it. The marshal took Reed to the territorial jail in Helena, 60 miles north. The trial was set for 2 weeks out, and Reed spent the time in a cell, staring at the walls and thinking about Margaret, about what might have been. He was surprised when Thomas Walsh appeared on the 4th day, hobbling on crutches but determined. You came, Reed said. Of course I came. You are family now, son, whether this works out or not. Thomas settled onto a bench outside the cell. Margaret is a wreck. She barely eats or sleeps. Just keep saying she is going to save you. She cannot. The law is clear, and I did kill Pritchard. She went to the homesteaders, the ones you saved. She is getting statements from them, trying to build a defense. Even found Pritchard's old foreman, man who said the rancher was planning exactly what you said. Reed sat up. That could help. Maybe, but Reed, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that it will not be enough. I know, and I need you to promise me something. If this goes bad, you will take care of Margaret, help her move on. She is young. She will find someone else, someone better. Thomas shook his head. She will never find anyone better because she has already found the best. You are a good man who made hard choices in a hard land, and whatever happens, I am proud to have known you. The words hit Reed like a blow. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of him? He could not remember. The trial began on a gray Monday morning, and the courtroom was packed. Reed stood before the judge, a stern-faced man named Holloway, and listened as the prosecutor laid out the case. Witnesses placed Reed at Pritchard's ranch. The rancher had been shot with Reed's type of gun. There was motive. Pritchard had refused to pay Reed for his work. It looked damning, and Reed knew it. Then Margaret took the stand. She was wearing her best dress, her blonde hair pinned up, and she looked scared but determined. She told the court about how Reed had saved her and her father, about his kindness and his honor, about the man he was, not the man the prosecutor claimed he had been. He could have left us to die in that storm, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. He could have robbed us or hurt us. Instead, he risked his own life to save ours. That is the man I know. That is the man I love. The prosecutor objected, saying her testimony was not relevant to the murder charge, but the judge allowed it to stand. Then came the homesteaders, one by one, testifying that Pritchard had threatened them, that he had been planning violence. Pritchard's former foreman, a weathered man named Jenks, testified that his boss had ordered him to burn out the families and that he had refused, costing him his job. Nolan came to the ranch that night to confront Pritchard, Jenks said. I was not there, but the next day Pritchard was dead and the homesteaders were safe. I figure Nolan did what needed doing. The prosecutor tried to break down the testimony, but the homesteaders held firm. Reed had saved them. Pritchard was a monster. Self-defense and protection of others should matter. Finally, Reed took the stand himself. I am not going to lie to this court, he said. I killed Samuel Pritchard. But I did it because he was going to murder innocent families, children included. He hired me to scare them off their land, and when I realized what he was really planning, I could not let it happen. I went to his ranch to stop him. We fought. He drew on me. I was faster, that is the truth. The prosecutor stood. So you admit to murder? I admit to stopping a murderer. If that is against the law, then I am guilty. But I would do it again. The courtroom erupted, and the judge banged his gavel for order. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, and they were the longest hours of Reed's life. He sat in a holding cell, listening to the clock tick, imagining the noose around his neck, thinking about Margaret's face when she learned he was going to hang. But when the jury returned, their verdict was not guilty by reason of defense of others. The courtroom exploded in noise, and Reed stood frozen, unable to believe what he had heard. Not guilty, he was free. Margaret pushed through the crowd, throwing herself into his arms, sobbing with relief. Reed held her, burying his face in her hair, and felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Outside the courthouse, Marshal Cordell approached them. You got lucky, Nolan, but I will be watching you. You stay clean from here on out. I intend to, Marshal. Cordell looked at Margaret, then back at Reed, and something that might have been respect crossed his face. She is good for you. Do not screw it up. I do not plan to. Reed and Margaret returned to Silver Creek the next day, and the town welcomed them like heroes. The homesteaders Reed had saved had spread the word about the trial, and public opinion was firmly on his side. Even the town mayor came by to shake his hand. But the best part was the quiet moments, helping Thomas in the store, eating dinner with Margaret, sleeping in a real bed in a real home. Reed had spent so long running that he had forgotten what it felt like to stay. A month after the trial, on a clear autumn evening, Reed took Margaret for a walk to the edge of town. The mountains were painted gold and orange by the setting sun, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. I have been thinking, Reed said as they stood looking out at the valley, about what your father said, about showing up every day and trying to be better. You are better, Reed. You have already proven that. Maybe, but I want to make it official. I want to be the man who wakes up next to you every morning and goes to sleep beside you every night. I want to help you run that lending library you talked about. I want to build a life here with you for as long as you will have me. He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, nothing fancy, just something he had traded for at the general store. Margaret Walsh, will you marry me? Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling that smile that made his world brighter. Yes, yes, Reed Nolan, I will marry you. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. They were married a week later in the white church Margaret had admired when they first rode into town. Thomas walked his daughter down the aisle on crutches, beaming with pride. Half the town attended, and the homesteaders Reed had saved stood as his groomsmen, which felt more right than anything he could have imagined. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Reed kissed Margaret like she was the air he needed to breathe. Because she had taken a broken, running man and shown him what it meant to have a home. After the wedding, Reed officially became Thomas's partner in the store. He proved surprisingly good at managing inventory and dealing with customers, and Margaret's lending library became the talk of the county. They converted a corner of the store into a reading room, and every Saturday, Margaret would read to the children of Silver Creek, bringing stories of adventure and romance to life. Reed would watch her from across the room, surrounded by kids with rapt faces, and marvel at how his life had changed. The nightmares that had plagued him for years grew less frequent, replaced by dreams of a future that felt real and possible. Thomas's leg healed well enough for him to walk with only a slight limp, and he took great joy in telling anyone who would listen about how his son-in-law had saved his life. Best thing that storm ever brought me, he would say, clapping Reed on the shoulder, was the man who would become my family. A year after the wedding, on a snowy December evening, Margaret placed Reed's hand on her swelling belly and told him they were going to have a baby. Reed felt tears sting his eyes, something that would have horrified his younger self but now felt natural. I am going to be a father, he said, wonderstruck. You are going to be a wonderful father, Margaret corrected and kissed him. Their son was born the following summer, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Margaret's father, and Reed held his child for the first time with shaking hands and a full heart. I will protect you, Reed whispered to his son. I will give you the life I never had, I promise. Margaret, exhausted but radiant in their bed, smiled at them. He is already protected. He has you. Reed looked at his wife, his child, the home they had built together, and understood finally what he had been running from all those years. Not danger or the law or his past. He had been running from the belief that he was worthy of love, worthy of peace, worthy of a future that was not defined by violence. Margaret had shown him he was wrong. She had looked at a man with blood on his hands and death in his past and seen someone worth saving. She had given him not just her love but her belief that he could be more than what he had been. The years passed in a blur of happiness Reed had never thought possible. The store prospered. Their family grew 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah with her mother's blonde hair, and another son, James, who had Reed's quiet intensity. The lending library expanded into a full bookstore, and Margaret's dream of bringing education to the frontier became reality. Reed never touched a gun again except to teach his sons to hunt and to defend what they loved. He became a town councilman, helped organize the volunteer fire brigade, and was known throughout the territory as a fair and honest man. But his favorite moments were still the quiet ones, sitting on the porch with Margaret after the children were asleep, her hand in his, watching the sun set over the mountains. She had threads of silver in her blonde hair now, and laugh lines around her eyes, and Reed thought she was more beautiful than the day he had first seen her in the snow. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him one evening, 20 years after that storm had brought them together. "Giving up the life you had before?" Reed pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "Every morning I wake up next to you, I thank God for that blizzard. I spent so long thinking I did not deserve happiness, that I was too broken for a normal life. But you saw something in me I could not see in myself." "I saw the truth," Margaret said simply, "that you were a good man who had made hard choices, and that you deserved love just as much as anyone else." Reed kissed her temple, holding her as the stars began to appear. "You gave me more than love, Margaret. You gave me a home, not just a place but a feeling. The feeling of belonging somewhere, of being part of something bigger than myself." "You gave me that too," she whispered. "When you said you would protect me, I never expected to find home in your arms, but that is exactly what I found. Home, safety, love, and everything I did not know I needed." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found each other against all odds in a harsh and unforgiving land, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives. Reed Nolan had been a drifter, a hired gun, a man who believed he was too broken for redemption. But love had found him anyway, in the form of a green-eyed woman with more courage than sense, who had looked at him and seen not what he was but what he could become. And in return he had given her everything he was and everything he would be. His protection, his devotion, his whole heart. He had promised to protect her, and he had kept that promise every day of their life together. But what he had not known then, and what he understood now with perfect clarity, was that she had protected him too. From his past, from his demons, from the loneliness that had threatened to consume him. They had saved each other. And that, Reed thought as Margaret dozed against his shoulder and the first stars winked into existence above Silver Creek, was the greatest gift the frontier had ever given him. Home.